The event hall in Manhattan, New York, was decorated simply but with love. 100 guests, flowers from the local market, music from a Spotify playlist instead of a live band. Julia Stevens, 27, was wearing a wedding dress that had cost $1,500. 6 months of savings working as a waitress. Beside her, her now husband, Richard Miller, 30, sales manager. They had just said "I do" and were at the reception when something strange happened. The hired servers didn't show up. Last-minute call, the company had gone bankrupt that morning. No warning, no refund, and nobody to serve food and drinks to 100 hungry people. Julia felt panic. She had spent every cent they had on this wedding. There was no plan B, no extra money to hire emergency help. And then she did the unthinkable. She grabbed a tray, placed champagne glasses on it, and began serving her own guests, wedding dress and all. Some laughed. Others took photos, posting them on social media with cruel captions. Wedding so poor the bride became the waitress. But then something happened. Edward Richardson, CEO of America's largest tech company, a guest from Richard's family side, stood up, grabbed a tray, and started serving too, in his $5,000 suit, with his $100,000 watch on his wrist, serving champagne alongside a bride he barely knew. And when someone laughed, when someone took a photo to mock, Edward looked directly at the camera and said something that would change everything. Not just for Julia, but for everyone there, and for the millions who would see the video later. Before continuing with this emotional story, subscribe to the channel to always receive special stories like this, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new videos. 3 months before that surreal moment at the wedding, Julia was counting tips at the diner where she worked when Richard came to pick her up. "We got the date," he said excitedly. "The venue is available in 3 months, and it fits our budget." Julia looked at the envelope with tips. $230 after an 8-hour double shift. "How much is the venue?" $3,000. "And with basic decorations and simple food, I can do the wedding for $15,000 total." $15,000. Julia had $4,000 saved. Richard had $6,000. They needed $5,000 more in 3 months. "We'll make it," he promised. "I'll take overtime. You'll take double shifts. We got this." And they tried. Julia worked 6 days a week. Double shifts. Swollen feet. Aching back. But every tip went straight into the wedding jar. Richard outsold everyone at work. Extra commissions. Working weekends. Everything for their dream wedding. It wasn't a magazine wedding. It wouldn't be French champagne and a famous band. But it would be theirs. Made with sweat and love. Julia's mother, Rosa, helped with what she could. Made homemade sweets for the dessert table. Saved them $2,000. "My daughter will have a beautiful wedding," she said. Even if simple. Richard's family was different. Wealthier. His father, Anthony, owned a car dealership. Not a millionaire, but comfortable. "Why not wait?" Anthony suggested. "Save more money. Do something more." "Appropriate." "Appropriate for whom?" Richard responded. "For your country club friends or for us?" "For you. Julia's a good girl, but she comes from humble beginnings, and the wedding will show that. People will judge." "Let them judge. I'm marrying her, not their opinions." But Anthony's words planted a seed of shame, of inadequacy, that Julia tried to ignore but grew anyway. 2 weeks before the wedding, the guest list unexpectedly grew. "My dad invited people from work," Richard said uncomfortably, "including his boss, Edward Richardson, CEO of Tech America." "The CEO, the billionaire, coming to our wedding?" "Apparently, yes, and 20 more people we don't know." Julia felt panic. "We don't have enough champagne, enough food, nothing enough for 20 more people." "I know. I'll talk to my dad." "No, I already sent invitations. It would be rude to uninvite. We'll figure it out." They cut from other places. Fewer flowers, less decoration, cheaper champagne, simpler food, to stretch the budget and accommodate extra guests, and they hired the cheapest catering company they could find. Servers Express. $1,000 for 4 servers for 4 hours. "Are you sure they're reliable?" Julia asked. "They have okay Google reviews and they fit the budget. It'll work out." The week of the wedding, Julia had a crisis. What if it goes wrong? What if people laugh? What if Edward Richardson goes around telling everyone it was the poorest wedding he ever attended? Her mother held her hands. "Honey, a wedding isn't about impressing people. It's about love. If people don't see that, that's their problem, not yours. But I'll be judged. my $1,500 dress, my simple venue, my cheap champagne, judged by people who don't matter. Richard loves you. I love you. The rest is noise. The wedding day dawned beautiful. Blue sky, sun shining. As if the universe was blessing the union. The ceremony was at a small neighborhood church. A priest who had known Julia since childhood. Simple but moving. When Richard saw Julia walking down the aisle, when tears fell from his eyes, nothing else mattered. Not money. Not rich guests. Just love. You look perfect, he whispered at the altar. $1,500 dress, she whispered back. Doesn't matter. You could be wearing a burlap sack. You'd still be the most beautiful woman in the world. The vows were heartfelt. No canned phrases, just words from the heart. Julia, you make me want to be better, work harder, not for money, but to give you the life you deserve. Richard, you already give me everything I need. Love, respect, partnership. Everything else is just extra. When the priest said, "You may kiss the bride," applause filled the small church, and for a moment, everything was perfect. Until they arrived at the reception. The hall looked nice, as much as possible. Simple white tablecloths, modest flower arrangements, dessert table with Rosa's homemade sweets. It was humble, but it was honest. Guests started arriving. Julia's family, aunts, uncles, cousins, neighbors, all happy, celebrating. Richard's family, more reserved, evaluating everything with critical looks. And then the 20 extras arrived. Anthony's colleagues, executives in suits, wives with expensive jewelry, and Edward Richardson. Edward was 38, self-made billionaire. He had built Tech America from a garage startup to a tech empire. Forbes estimated his fortune at $2 billion. He entered the hall, looked around, and his expression was neutral, impossible to read. "This is the wedding," whispered one of the executive wives to another, loud enough for Julia to hear. Apparently, charming. In a rustic way. Rustic, code for poor. Julia felt her face heat with shame. But she smiled, greeted guests, played the role of gracious hostess even while wanting to disappear. Photo session, cake, everything going okay, until it was time to serve champagne and appetizers. An hour before the scheduled time, Julia's phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello? Julia Stevens, this is Servers Express." "Yes, you're late. You should have been here 15 minutes ago." "That's what I'm calling about. The company went bankrupt. This morning. The owner disappeared with the money. There will be no servers, I'm sorry." Julia felt the world fall. "What? But I paid $1,000. "I know, and many others did too, but there's nothing we can do. Sorry." The call ended, and Julia stood there. Wedding dress, 100 guests waiting, and nobody to serve. Richard came running when he saw her expression. "What happened?" "Servers. They're not coming. Company went bankrupt. This morning." "You're kidding." "I wish I was." They looked at the hall, at tables with food, trays with champagne, and 0 staff to serve. "What do we do?" Richard whispered. Julia looked at the guests, at Edward Richardson talking with executives, at judgmental wives looking at their phones, at her family waiting for celebration, and made a decision. "We serve ourselves." "Julia, no, you're the bride." "So what? I'd rather serve my own guests than leave them hungry. At least we try." She went to the table, grabbed a large tray, placed champagne glasses, 15 glasses on the heavy tray, and began walking through the hall. "Champagne?" she offered to the first group, her aunts and uncles, who took glasses with encouraging smiles. "Champagne?" she offered to the second group, Richard's cousins, who took them but with confused looks. And then she reached the executives' table, the judgmental wives, Edward Richardson. "Champagne?" she offered, trying to keep her voice steady. One of the wives, Anna Parker, according to the name tag on her Chanel dress, looked and laughed, loud, cruel. "Oh my God, the bride is serving? Is this for real?" Another wife grabbed her phone, started filming. "This is going to be gold on Instagram." Poor wedding, bride waitress. Julia felt tears threatening, but maintained composure. "The catering company went bankrupt this morning, no warning. So yes, I'm serving, because I prefer this to leaving guests without." "How convenient," Anna said. "Company went bankrupt, or you simply couldn't afford real servers." The company really did go bankrupt, Richard defended, arriving beside Julia. And we're doing the best we can. Clearly, best isn't very much. Another executive's wife laughed. Anthony, why did you bring us to this? We could be at the country club. Anthony looked mortified, embarrassed, and didn't defend his son or daughter-in-law. Julia was about to run away, wedding dress, tray and all, when Edward Richardson did something unexpected. He stood up, calmly, and took the tray from Julia's hands. Excuse me, he said, and began serving. Absolute silence at the table. Edward Richardson, billionaire, CEO, serving champagne to his own colleagues, at a humble wedding, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Edward, what are you doing? Anna asked, shocked. Serving champagne, obviously. Do you want one or not? Badassine, but you're the CEO, and she's the bride, at her own wedding, who had bad luck with a vendor. So we're going to help. Or are we going to sit here judging while people work? He looked around the table, clear challenge in his eyes. But before continuing to discover what Edward does and how this viral moment changes everything, leave your like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any new stories. Would you do what Edward did? Or would you sit there judging? Also tell me which city you're watching from and I'll mark your comment with a special heart. Now let's get back to our story. Edward held the tray firmly and looked directly at Anna Parker and the other judgmental wives. So? He repeated. Are you going to help? Or are you going to keep sitting there taking cruel photos for Instagram? Anna turned red, mortified, and slowly, very slowly, lowered her phone. I wasn't. First you were, and everyone saw, including me. And tomorrow when you post those photos mocking this bride who worked 6 months to pay for this wedding, I'm going to share them, with my own caption, about empathy, about class, and about how money doesn't buy decency. Absolute silence, not just at the table, but throughout the entire hall. Everyone had stopped to watch. Edward turned to Julia and Richard. Do you have more trays, more food to serve? We do, Julia said, her voice trembling. But you don't need to. I know I don't need to, but I want to. And more than that, everyone here is going to help, because this isn't shameful. What's shameful is sitting there judging while people work. What's shameful is mocking someone for having less money. This is just solving a problem. He looked around the hall. Who's going to help? Let's turn this into a real celebration, where everyone participates, where what matters is love, not how many servers you can afford. For a moment no one moved. And then, surprisingly, the first person to stand was Julia's uncle, John, a 50-year-old mechanic with calloused hands. I'll help, he said. My niece doesn't serve alone. Then her cousin, then a neighbor, and then, like a domino effect, half the hall was standing, grabbing trays, serving food, serving champagne, and in the middle of the organized chaos, something magical happened. The wedding transformed from an embarrassing event into a community celebration, people laughing, talking, connecting. Edward served alongside Julia for 20 minutes, and in that time, they talked. Why did you do this? She asked. Why did you help me? Because I recognize hard work when I see it, and I recognize unfair judgment. You didn't deserve to be mocked. You deserve to be celebrated. But you're a CEO, a billionaire. Why do you care about a humble wedding? Edward smiled, first genuine smile of the night. Because I was you 15 years ago, I married my wife at a wedding even simpler than this. Hall rented at a neighborhood club, food my mother-in-law made, and zero money for extras. Julia looked surprised. You? But I thought you were always rich. No, I built the company from scratch, with $50,000 borrowed, and got married in the middle of it, when I had nothing. And people judged, just like they were judging you, and it hurt. So when I saw you being humiliated, I saw myself 15 years ago, and I wasn't going to let it happen without doing something. Tears fell from Julia's eyes. Thank you. Thank you so much. You don't know what this means. I do. Exactly. When everyone had been served, when the music started playing, Edward did one more thing. He took out his phone and recorded a video. Hello, I'm Edward Richardson, CEO of Tech America. And today I had the privilege of attending the most beautiful wedding I've ever been to. Not because of the decorations, not because of expensive food, but because of love, because of community, because of people who, when something went wrong, didn't judge. They helped. He turned the camera to the hall, to people laughing, dancing, celebrating. Julia and Richard, congratulations. You have something money can't buy, and I'll remember this day forever. He posted the video, and within hours it went viral. 5 million views in 6 hours, 10 million in 12, and the comments were overwhelmingly positive. This is real class. CEO serving at a humble wedding. This is leadership. I cried. This is humanity. But some negative comments too, mainly from Anna and her friends defending themselves. It was a joke, it wasn't serious. He's exaggerating. We weren't being cruel. Edward responded publicly. It wasn't a joke. It was cruelty. And it's on record. So now choose, learn and grow, or continue being examples of how not to act. The next morning, Julia woke up to her phone exploding. Messages, calls, emails. What's happening? Richard asked, sleepy. Edward's video. It went viral. We're everywhere. And they were. News, TV shows, social media. The story of bride who served her own wedding and CEO who helped had captured the nation's imagination. But with virality came something unexpected. Support. Real. Tangible. Photography company offered free post-wedding shoot. You deserve professional photos on us. Travel agency offered honeymoon. 5 days at resort in Hawaii. All-inclusive. Our way of celebrating your love. And Tech America, Edward's company, offered something more significant. Richard, I'd like to offer you a position at our company, Edward said in a call. Sales manager, with 40% higher salary than current, if you're interested. Richard was shocked. Why? Why are you doing all this? Because I saw how you defended Julia, how you stood by her, and because I look for people with character. I can teach skills. I can't teach character. Julia received offers too. Restaurants wanting to hire her, with better salaries, better hours. But the bigger impact was emotional. Messages from hundreds of people sharing their own stories. My wedding was simple too, and I was judged. Thank you for showing I'm not alone. This gave me hope that good people still exist. I'm getting married next year, and I won't be ashamed of simplicity because love is what matters. 3 days after the wedding, Julia and Richard were invited to a TV show. Live interview. How did you feel when the servers didn't show up? The host asked. Terrified, Julia admitted. I had spent every penny, and thinking that guests would have nothing. It was a nightmare. And when you started serving, how was it? Humiliating, especially when people laughed. When they took photos to mock, I felt like I had failed. As a bride, as a host, as a person. And when Edward helped, Julia started crying. It changed everything. Because it wasn't just about champagne, it was about dignity. About someone powerful saying, you're not alone, you're not less, you matter. And that saved not just the wedding, but saved me, Richard added. Edward showed us that real success isn't how much you have. It's how you treat people when they have less. And he treated us with respect, with humanity, when he could have just left, or worse, judged like others did. The show ended with a surprise. Edward appeared. Liv, I brought something for you, he said, and handed them an envelope. Julia opened it. It was a check for $100,000. What? No, we can't accept this. It's not charity, Edward interrupted. It's an investment. In you. In the future. Use it for a down payment on an apartment, for education, for whatever you need. Because I believe in you. Julia and Richard cried. On national TV, and millions watching cried too. In the following months, their lives changed dramatically. Richard started at Tech America, loved the job, grew quickly. Julia went back to school, using part of Edward's money, pursuing business administration degree, a dream she had paused due to lack of resources. They bought a small apartment in the same neighborhood where they grew up, because they wanted to keep their roots. And they kept in touch with Edward, not as CEO and employee, but as friends, real ones. 6 months after the wedding, Edward invited them to dinner at his house, and Julia met his wife, Marina. Marina was exactly as Edward described, simple, kind, and completely unimpressed by money. Our wedding was at a neighborhood club hall, she said, laughing, with 50 guests, and my mom made lasagna for everyone. Couldn't get simpler. And it was perfect, Edward added, Because it was ours, like your wedding. During dinner, Edward shared more of his story. When the company started growing, when money started coming, we changed. I especially. I became arrogant, focused on image, on impressing. And I almost lost him, Marina said, because he was becoming someone I didn't recognize, focused on status instead of substance. What changed? Richard asked. Crisis, 5 years ago. Company almost went bankrupt. We lost 70% of our value. And in that moment I discovered who real friends were. And they weren't the rich people from the country club. They were people like you. People who cared about character, not bank account. And he came back, to who he was, to who I fell in love with, Marina said affectionately. That's why I reacted when I saw you being judged, Edward said to Julia, because I saw a person being reduced to money, and that irritated me, deeply. 1 year after the wedding, Julia and Richard had an anniversary party, simple, at their apartment, and invited Edward and Marina. This is perfect, Marina said, looking around. Small, cozy, full of love. It's all we need, Julia responded, and it was true. The apartment was small, furniture was simple, but it was theirs, earned, and full of good memories. During the party, the viral wedding came up. Did you see the latest stats? Edward asked. Video has 50 million views now, and it generated a movement. Movement? Richard asked. Real weddings, people posting simple weddings, celebrating love instead of extravagance, and restaurants, photographers, many offering discounted services for couples with limited budgets. Really? Julia was surprised. Really? Your wedding changed the conversation about what really matters, and I'm seeing real impact. Julia started crying. Again. I never thought the most humiliating day of my life would turn into something like this. Something positive. Best thing that ever happened, Richard said, because it showed who I really married, a woman who has the courage to do what's necessary, without shame, without excuses. 2 years after the wedding, Julia graduated. Richard was promoted to director at Tech America, and they were expecting their first child. A boy, Julia revealed to Edward and Marina during lunch. And if you'll allow it, we'd like to name him Edward, in your honor. Edward was visibly moved. It would be an honor. But why? I only did what any decent person would do. No, Julia corrected. You did what few would, and changed our lives, completely. So yes, our son will be named Edward, and we'll tell him the story of how a CEO served champagne at a wedding, and how a small act of kindness rippled through millions. 5 years after the viral wedding, Julia and Richard returned to the same hall for vow renewal, this time with their own resources. The hall was full, 200 people, beautiful but not extravagant decoration, live band, and professional servers. But in the middle of the ceremony, Julia did something unexpected. She grabbed a tray, placed champagne glasses, and started serving guests. What are you doing? Richard whispered, confused but smiling, honoring the memory, honoring the moment that changed everything, and showing I'm not ashamed, never will be. And one by one, guests stood, grabbed trays, and served together. Edward, Marina, family, friends, co-workers, everyone participating. And at the end, when everyone had been served, Julia made a toast. 5 years ago, on what should have been the happiest day of my life, I felt more humiliated than ever. But an incredible man showed that humiliation was just perspective, and that courage, kindness, and community matter more than money. She looked at Edward. You gave us more than a check, more than a job. You gave us dignity and an example. And today, renewing our vows, I make a promise. I will live as you taught us, with generosity, with empathy, and with courage to do right, even when it's hard. Applause filled the hall, and there wasn't a dry eye. 10 years after the original wedding, the viral video still circulated, used in schools to teach empathy, in companies to teach leadership, and in discussions about class and dignity. Julia had become a motivational speaker, telling the story, inspiring others. Richard was vice president at Tech America, working directly with Edward, and Edward Jr., their son, was 5 years old, curious, kind, like his namesake. "Mommy, why am I named Edward?" he asked one day. Julia knelt to his height. "Because there's an incredible man named Edward who changed our lives. who taught us that kindness is a superpower, and we hope you grow up being like him. Is he a superhero? In a way, yes. He saved a wedding and a family, and showed that heroism isn't about power, it's about choosing to do right. Can I meet him? You already know him, Uncle Edward. He's your godfather. Oh, Uncle Edward is a hero. He is. The greatest hero I know. 15 years after that day at the wedding, Julia was giving a lecture when Anna Parker, the woman who had filmed to mock, appeared. After the lecture, she approached Julia. "Can I talk to you, please?" Julia hesitated, but agreed. "I came to apologize," Anna said, genuine tears, "for what I did, for what I said, for the cruelty. That was 15 years ago. I know, and I've carried the shame since then. Lost friends, lost respect, lost a lot, and deserved it. But I needed you to know. I'm sorry, deeply. And you transformed my worst moment into a lesson for the whole world, and I'm grateful, even though it hurts." Julia studied her and saw real remorse. "I accept your apology, and I forgive you, because holding on to anger doesn't help anyone." Anna cried, relieved, grateful. "Thank you, and no, I changed, because of you, because of that day. I never again judged anyone by money, by appearance, by anything superficial." Then something good came, for all of us. 20 years after the viral wedding, Julia and Richard celebrated their anniversary with family. Edward and Marina, Edward Jr., now 15, their daughter Sophia, 10, and Edward and Marina had children too, 17-year-old twins. "Remember when I served champagne?" Julia said nostalgically. "How could I forget?" Edward laughed. "It changed everything, for all of us." "It did?" Edward Jr. asked. "But I thought it only changed things for you." "No," Edward responded. "It changed me too, reminded me why I built the company, not for money, but to impact lives. And that day reconnected me with purpose. And for me," Marina added, "it reminded me that I married a good man, who doesn't just talk about values but lives them." "For me," Richard said, "it was a lesson in courage. My wife had the courage to do what was necessary without shame, and that inspires me to this day." "And for me," Julia said, "it was a lesson that humiliation can become transformation, that the worst day can become the best story, and that kindness, even small, ripples forever." Edward Jr. looked at his parents, at his godparents, and understood. "So I was named for a moment, for a story, for a lesson. You were, and we hope you carry the lesson, that when you see someone being judged, humiliated, reduced, you do what Uncle Edward did. You stand up, you help, and you change the narrative. I promise," Edward Jr. said solemnly, "I'll be a hero, like Uncle Edward." And there, 20 years after a wedding that started in humiliation and ended in viral celebration, the family understood. Small acts of kindness are never small. They ripple, through lives, through generations, through time. And Julia and Richard's wedding wasn't just about their love, it was about a lesson for the world. That real class isn't about money, it's about character. And that a moment of kindness can change not just a day, but decades, and lives and culture. Because in the end, it doesn't matter how much the champagne costs, it matters who serves it, and with what heart. Comment below, kindness transforms. So I know you made it to the end of this video, and I'll mark your comment with a special heart. And if Julia, Richard, and Edward's story moved you, I have another even more surprising story to share with you. Just click on the video showing up on your screen now and I'll tell you everything. Big hug and see you in the next emotional story. Bye-bye.